Hey, I'm Russ from Pilates Guy, and I'm talking to you about the pelvic tilt today. Really, really important movement for posture, sorts out a lot of problems and really helps warm up the lower back. Pelvic tilts we use in Pilates every single session, more than once, and the use in Pilates, and my sessions particularly, is mainly to get ourselves into a neutral spine, neutral pelvis, which unfortunately, because of our lifestyles, we don't really stay in that posture nowadays. But also we just need to find that neutral to keep the spine safe when we're doing certain exercises. So that's the main reason that we use pelvic tilts in Pilates, is to get ourselves into that good alignment, that safe alignment for the spine, and to work from that position, whether we're on the floor or standing up. The benefits of the pelvic tilts are that you stretch and strengthen the lower back muscles, you strengthen the core, and you mobilise, improving mobility in the lower back, in that lumbar spine, and you also help your pelvis find the optimum position. So good posture, not that there's a perfect posture, but it's going to find a good range for that pelvis to sit in. So it's really important for posture. Basically, through our lifestyles of sitting down all the time, sitting down for work, sitting down in cars, sitting down before doing anything else that we're doing, our hip flexors get really, really tight, our glutes start working, back muscles get weak and long, and the hip flexors get tight and short, and they tilt the pelvis into what we call an anterior pelvic tilt. So hip bones starting to tilt forwards, tailbone starting to stick out, and a bit of an arch through that lower back. And this can be a real cause of back problems, pulls. It can affect all the muscles down the backs of the legs, so like hamstring pulls and things like that. It can cause neck pain, even ankle pain, having tilted pelvis. So it's good to try and reverse some of that negative impact of sitting down. So pelvic tilts are a really good way that you can do that as well. So I'm going to take you through the pelvic tilts, which I do see a lot of people getting wrong in my sessions. So we'll start off with the standing pelvic tilt. So I always say just to get your feet hip distance apart and just stand up nice and tall. I prefer my hands on my hips, but you can put your hands front and back, and the benefit of front and back is that you can feel that lower back moving. So we do need to know we're getting a big movement through that lower back. So nice soft knees. We don't want to lock out the knees, just soft knees. And we just start to tuck the tailbone under and then stick the tailbone out. And we just want this movement going through the pelvis. For me, I'll get pops and cracks in my lower back, and it's like a release of pressure. Sometimes that's my SI joint releasing, which it can help with. It is good to have the hand in the lower back just to feel the lower back moving there, to feel that pushing out and then arching. We want quite a big movement there. So what I tend to see in sessions are people swaying backwards and forwards, or they're just bending and straightening their legs and maybe pushing backwards and forwards at the same time, but they're not actually tilting the pelvis. They're not lengthening and shortening that lower back, which is what we're trying to do. That's the movement that we want. So do try this in front of a mirror, make sure you're doing it right. If you struggle to keep this isolated to the pelvis, you could bend your knees a little bit more, and that also gives you a deeper stretch in the lower back. So this is a great movement. So in Pilates, we don't do this for very long. We'll only do a few each way, just get the movement right, and then we tend to make it smaller each time, reducing the range of motion bit by bit by bit, until we come to a natural stop, somewhere between those two movements. So try and get into our neutral spine. This is where the pubic bone and hip bones would be level, hip bones roughly in line across the waistline, natural curve in the lower back. So that's where we want to try and end up for Pilates, whether we're standing or on the mat. That's what we're aiming for. If you're doing it to warm up your lower back, if you get back pain, this is highly recommended by so many different healthcare companies and the NHS as well. Recommend pelvic tilts for back pain. Really good for those back muscles, mobilising, improving mobility in the back. If you've got a stiff lower back, sitting down a lot, you lose the mobility. You should do this regularly. For me, this has been a godsend for my back problems, and this is part of my warm-up for my spine before I go and lift weights or do any impact sports. So it's a really important movement. So it's really good to do it for a bit longer than we would necessarily do it in a class if you've got things going on with the back, or if you just wanted to warm up the lower back. So you could do it 20, 30 times. And I do this regularly, even outside of teaching sessions as well. Now, the other way that you could do this is on the floor, on the mat. And some people find it easier to get the right movement through the spine. They're not sure what tucking the tailbone under should feel like, which is when we tuck under, we flatten that lower back. And when we stick the tailbone out, we arch that lower back. This is included very briefly in my Pilates standing setup video, and it's it's also part of my spinal warm-up video. But I'll just go through this same thing on the floor, and then you can give it a go if it's something that you've been struggling with, if you've not done them before. Really, really good movement to do in an office. If you've got a sore back, if you work at home alone, great, because you can just stand up and start doing pelvic tilts. But if you work in a busier office, I'd probably suggest going off somewhere else to do it rather than standing at your desk doing pelvic tilts. But it is a really, really important movement for that back. So we'll bring it to the floor. So we just bring ourselves down onto the mat, flat on our backs with our feet flat on the floor, legs bent. And you might find there's a bit of space under your lower back. Now I come straight into my neutral spine straight away, but a lot of people don't. They might have a big arch under that lower back. You can get the hands all the way through, or they might be completely flat down onto the mat. So we want to start wherever you're comfortably, naturally finding your back in this position. You can put your hands on your hips again, or just keep the hands down by the sides, and you just start a pelvic tilt here. So when you tuck your tailbone under you, your butt might lift off the floor, and then when we go the other way, you might find there's a really big gap under the lower back, and we just want to make this movement as big as we can. We don't want to peel all the way up, we just want the pelvis moving like before, and that lower back you'll find flexing and arching. If you put your hands under your lower back, when you tuck your tailbone under, you'll be flattening the back down, squashing your hands, and when you stick the tailbone out, you'll be making a really big gap under that lower back, and you just get some feedback from the mat. So some people do prefer this on the mat because you get that feedback, and you just make that smaller each time, bit by bit, until you come to your natural stop into that neutral spine. Neutral, if you put the hands under the lower back, you wouldn't get them to meet in the middle. They wouldn't meet at all, sorry, they just go part of the way through. They wouldn't meet in the middle in neutral. Again, pubic bone, hip bones would be level. That's our neutral spine, and it is good to practice that if you sit down a lot, if you're doing Pilates, and also if you just want to warm up that back to do it for quite a bit longer. Quite simple. I will do another video on neutral and imprint as well, which is really important for Pilates, but this is useful for anyone, whether you've got those postural issues. This can really help with those repetitive hamstring and calf strains. Very, very important if you're sitting down a lot, as I mentioned, just to keep mobility in the lower back and stop the anterior pelvic tilt. So hopefully you find that somewhat useful. Do get in touch with me if you've got any questions or anything at all that I can help with. And thanks so much for watching the video.